A couple weeks ago, I found myself sitting across a table talking to a group of mothers. The conversation was organic, it was very smooth. We were having a good time at an event, and in the organic conversation, somehow, some way, church was brought up. Now, I'm not a person who pushes the agenda or tries to talk about church to a lot of people, which is kind of opposite of what I'm sure I'm supposed to be doing, but I never wanted to pressure anybody. In this conversation with these amazing mothers, one of them said, I don't know what's going on, but my daughter has been talking and asking me about taking her to church and Sunday school. And we just don't do that in our house. I'm not sure where she's hearing that from. Another one said, we don't do that either. Church is just a business and they're all about money. And I can't stand behind that. Another person in that same weekend said, I don't need that. I'm not supporting that. And these statements grieved my heart. Not because I wanted to preach to them, not because I wanted to stand on a platform and give them a sermon, but because it sounds like there's going to be people who miss the very core of what it's all about. And in that moment, I sat there and listened quietly, taking it in, observing, as the most open-minded as I could. And if someone asked me in that same conversation, where do you go to church? I could answer that. But if someone were to ask me, where's your home church? I'd probably say, welcome back to the Girl in Ashes, episode 11, titled Searching for Home. What actually makes somewhere feel like home? Is church somewhere you attend or somewhere that you belong? These are good questions to ponder. I'm going to paint a picture for you a little bit. I grew up in a very unique church environment. And to be completely honest with you, it was a mix. It was a mix of situations. It was a mix of churches. I can honestly say that even though I spent my entire life under the leadership of my father in his church, we had very different experiences throughout those years. There was the early childhood years. There was the years my papa was alive, the years my uncle was alive, and the years that dad was finding his own footing for the first time. It wasn't until I was about 25 years old that my own mother told my father that she finally felt freedom in worship and in church for the first time in her life. And that was once my father was on his own 2 feet. Something about him that was kind of funny is people dubbed him as Baptist-costal. People dubbed him as someone who quenched the spirit. He had a lot of people talk about him. But the one that stuck the most is that he was a traditionalist. At the end of the day, that is where we put him as a label, because really no other churches associated too much with us. We were just different. And when I say that, I say I learned a lot from my father in that experience. And I don't want to misstep anything, because a lot of people listening to this were under his leadership and at that church for a good portion of their life. And when I was younger, we were strictly Pentecost. My papa was alive. There was a lot of rules. A lot of things that some people might consider legalism. And I'm not labeling anything specifically, but I'm just saying that's kind of where it would go if you were looking for a label. A lot of don't do this, that, or the other, or you're just going to die and burn in hell. And then when my papa passed away, it got a little less strict. I think I was probably 17. The first time I ever went to a movie theater, which we kind of talked about that not too long ago. It was like miraculous that dad went to a movie with me. And then once my uncle passed away, which was my mom's brother, it got a little less. And the church was continuing to change and evolve and move. The youth group changed, the leadership changed. A big portion of who helped run the church had moved away to a different area to pursue ministry elsewhere, to grow a youth group elsewhere, and to follow God's will in their life. And it put our church in a weird transition phase. And as I was growing into my teenage years, we had different leadership, different youth groups, and different things going on. By the time I was in my 20s, though, Dad had evolved in a different way. He started really focusing on souls rather than rules. Now, don't get me wrong. That man was very conservative, and he often would tell me when I would question some things that he believed in, that he would say, if it's a gray area, then steer more strict. Because at the end of the day, if he was wrong in his interpretation, was it worth it? That was his out when I would challenge some of his thoughts and processes. Dad didn't believe in women wearing pants or makeup or nails like this or jewelry for majority of his life. But the older I got, the more he came in contact with prayer warriors that didn't fit that description. A lady in his church that he absolutely loved who didn't follow all of those rules and guidelines. And sometimes it takes that learning, growing experience to see that maybe not all of the things that were taught were really necessary. And again, I'm not saying that he was completely free and willy-nilly thinking we should do anything and everything, but it gave us a church environment that was a little bit more open to loving people. And like I said, I was probably mid to late 20s when my own mother said, I finally feel free to worship in my church. I finally feel like I'm not being judged in my own house of worship. And Dad was just different. He really wanted people to feel loved. His tagline was a place where everyone was family. So he wanted everyone to feel like they were part of the family when they walked in. Hugs, greetings, getting to know them, being a part of their growth as a person, getting their cell phone number, texting them, calling them. And part of this conversation that I had with these women a couple weeks ago was about the very functionality of churches today, which we're going to dive deeper into that, but I want to paint a picture of where it all started for me. My home was a place that had transitioned very much into a place of freedom. And when I say that, there are still things that we do for respective elders, we do for respective tradition. Everybody has that, whether you're Jew or Islam or Christian or Catholicism, whatever the case may be. There is still respects of traditions that everyone follows, and we still did. And it was a place where we had the elderly people come up and sing, and we still had testimony time, and we still had some sprinkling of praise and worship music. Thanks to moi, I got in a little more praise and worship, a little more modern, okay? But there was freedom to worship. There was freedom to love on people. There was freedom to give an opinion, give a thought, give a testimony. And although one of the reasons why he got dubbed Baptist or quenching the spirit, Dad didn't believe in wildfire. He did believe in allowing the Lord to move, the Spirit of God to move in the house. And one of the things that stood out to me that grieved my heart a couple weekends ago during this conversation with these women is they didn't want to support an institution that was about business and money instead of souls. And something unique about my home church growing up is my father did not take a salary. His statement to me was, God called me to this, and I'm doing it to follow his will and for souls. This is not for me to make profit. So he worked full time, even in his sickest days, and used majority of the income of the church to take care of the church, the events, the community, and world missions. I shared that with those ladies at the table, and they were mind blown that there was even something like that existed. How sad is that? This whole episode is really supposed to be talking about the journey it has taken me to walk away from Calvary Temple, which we are not diving back into that. That was in episode 8. But when I walked away from there, I had to find somewhere else to land. I came out of a great place. I wasn't bitter towards religion or church functionality. In fact, I believe that there is a necessity to community, which I will talk about here too. And I joked with Dad many times that if anything happened to him, I would go to my backup sister church, Evangel Temple. And he would laugh at me because they were so vastly different from our 50 to 60 congregation that had Southern gospel music, hymns out of the hymnal book with a little bit of praise and worship sprinkled in. He pastored many churches while he was there, and at one point, our biggest crowd was probably a solid 130, but most of the time we stayed between 50 and 60. The majority of the ages were over 65, but we had a good, strong youth group as well. It was a mix, and it was family, and it was close, and it was free. And 80% of the time, that could just be me. The other 20% of the time, that's for others, not for church family. I really didn't realize how much of my identity lived inside the building until I had to walk away from it. How does one physically grieve a place that's still standing? When I walked away from Calvary Temple in episode 8, or in whatever year, 2024, end of 2024, right? Yeah. I didn't just walk away from a building, which we know. I didn't just walk away from my family, which we know. But also my Sunday school class, my drums, the piano where I felt closest to God, the place that I felt closest to Dad, the worship center that felt like freedom, in a traditional sense that felt like we were closer to what Jesus Christ really wanted from all of us instead of the institution. And here I was. Where am I supposed to go now? It was a lot to walk away from and leave behind. And you sit around and you wonder, in this grief that I'm feeling, am I grieving a building? Am I grieving tradition? Am I grieving the loss of my parents? Or is it just all of it combined? And I honestly think it's all of it combined. So where do you go and where do you land when home is gone? It's taken from you. And now what? Originally, when I first started the journey of trying to find a new home, I landed at Evangel. Of course, I joked with Dad about it. Why would I not? And let me say this and clarify this really quick. If you are local and you know Evangel Temple, I will say that there's so much that I truly love about that church. I have admiration for it. Their missions, their outreach, what they do for the community, what they do for their young people, the heart that they have, they truly exemplify the hands and feet of Jesus in so many ways. However, I have a grieving spirit a lot when I walk out of their services. And here's why. I personally like to be in a service where I feel like the Lord himself has freedom. And what we find in larger churches who are doing massive positive things for community and they're growing their crowds and they have to split up services is that they have to stick to a schedule. And often when you find churches stuck to a schedule, you find a lack of freedom for the Spirit. You can feel God in that house. The worship team is giving their all. The pastor's phenomenal. But there's a schedule to follow. And because of that, there's been many Sundays I walked out and I thought, oh, God, where is my home? So my sister and I both took an entire year almost. Well, January until I think she said August recently, trying to find the right fit. Now, I don't know about you, whoever is listening to this, but if you've ever went on a church tour, it's a treat. Especially if you've spent all of your life, except for the last couple years, in the same type of circle. Because in this journey, we didn't just stay in the circle. We were searching for something that fit who we were now, because not a lot of people knew how Calvary Temple functioned and the freedom and the love and the missions and the things that we had a heart for. It didn't match anyone else we could think of at the time. So during our year of running, the first church we fell in love with as a team was a Baptist church. We went to Tennessee quite often and fell in love with the First Baptist there in Tennessee. Why? Well, because we had spent like 4 or 5 months at Calvary Temple under the new leadership, suffering spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And we walked into the Baptist church and felt like, oh, I can breathe. I can feel Jesus. Now, trust me, later on we find out it wasn't for me. It's a little slow. But we fell in love with that first. And I was like, oh, this is my new home at first. We even went to their missions trip training. And we tried to get out there once a month, which was crazy because it was in Tennessee. And we live in Florida. But when we would be in town, we would still be exploring. So we took my 2 favorite teenagers and we carried them with us to different churches. I visited several non-denominational churches at the beaches and around town. 4 or 5 different Church of Gods, Assembly of Gods, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian. I wasn't opposed to any of it. I was willing to see, how does it function? How does it fit? And are they really reaching people for the right reasons? That was an interesting journey. Trust me, trust and believe, you learn a lot on a church tour. And if you're willing to be open-minded, it's really not that bad. And I was willing to be open-minded. I always have been. I still am. I know what I know. I believe what I believe. But I am open-minded to learn from other people. That goes back to the conversation that started this episode. When I sat at that table with those women, one of them was uncomfortable with the conversation, and walked away for a little bit. The other one sat across from me, and as we were discussing it, she looked at me and said, I've never really met an authentic Christian. Ooh. Wow. And she was saying it as a compliment to me because for the first time she sat across someone who sat here and said, listen, it's not about a checklist. It's not about a paycheck. It's about a relationship. It's about community. And this was something that was a natural conversation to me and something she had never had with someone else in this way. That's crazy if you think about it. It's just, that's mind-blowing. But this journey trying to find my new home was very entertaining. There was times we had interesting music, definitely interesting pastors, interesting congregations, and a variety of sizes. We went to churches that had 10 people in the audience and churches that had 500 in the audience. We went to places that did communion every service and places that didn't do communion at all. It was a journey that was enlightening. Every time we would take away parts that we loved about it, parts that we wouldn't want, in the anticipation that we would eventually find a home, and if we didn't, we would make our own. Maybe there was a sense of hope that Calvary Temple would be still our landing place at the end of the journey. But in the meantime, we're going to learn, glean, take what we can, because so far, nothing matched what I needed. Something I had to ask myself is, was I looking for a church, or was I looking to recreate my childhood? It's a tough self-reflection, because there was nothing like the way the church was in my childhood or my 20s. Can a church be almost everything, perfect, and still not feel like home? And why? Have you been on a church hunt and felt like no place felt like home? Why is that? And what does true freedom really look like? I wrestled with all of these questions for a long time. And then I had to start saying, I need to ask myself different questions because these aren't leading me anywhere. Maybe the better question isn't, should people go to church, but why did God design us to need people? The first thing that God actually called not good, believe it or not, wasn't sin. What? No, it was isolation. Go back to Genesis and we see that God created a perfect person in a perfect garden in a perfect world. And he stepped back and said, ooh, it's not good for man to be alone. Let's give him a partner. Isolation was the first whoopsie out of the perfect creation from the very beginning. God really didn't design us to be alone. And a lot of times people are saying, I don't need church and I don't need this and I don't need that. But thousands of years later, research continues to develop the necessity of community, connection, and partnership. And I'm going to look at a lot of my notes here, so I apologize for me looking down because I didn't memorize all of them, but I wanted to make sure my research was good for this portion of what is so important to me about trying to find a home. There's so many times in my past childhood that my mother would say, I don't need to go to church to be close to God. And that's true. You don't need church to be close to God, but God calls us to be a part of a church and community. And I know a lot of people are going to have debates about that, but there are scriptures to back it up. But if you don't want to look at scriptures, we're going to lead into this. There's actual scientific research that expresses the necessity of human beings to be in a community, in a group, and in an environment that you feel connected. Strong social relationships are associated with about 50% greater likelihood of survival. There was a study done on 300,000 individuals, and 50% of them were a part of a community group. The other 50% were not. The 50% that were not rapidly got a lot of health diseases, heart disease, cancer, sickness, doctor's appointments more often. And the only thing different in the lifehood of all of these people who were under this research was the lack of community and connection. Large reviews are linked to social isolation and loneliness as an increased risk of premature death. Health communities support emotional resilience and well-being. If loneliness can literally shorten our lives, then why are we so comfortable building our lives around an environment where no one truly knows us? That question hit hard for myself. I try to stay very guarded, but I'll be completely honest, I am extremely lonely and I hate it. Loneliness is one of the hardest things, and I was not going to cry in this podcast. I cried in every episode. We're not doing it here. But that has been one of the hardest things to overcome. And I've gotten a lot of help from that, from God placing Bomb Party in my life, which we talked about in a couple episodes, and giving me a community of people who have been there and supported me in that way while I was searching for a church home For a majority of my life, my church family was my community and family. And I'll be completely honest, my Calvary Temple family, especially if you are listening, shout out to you guys. Y'all are really my family. And in my darkest hours, I could reach out to them for prayer, connection, have dinner, have lunch, things like that. But life is life, and there's separation there, and loneliness creeps up at me daily, not weekly, not just on Sundays, but every single day. And I'm so thankful for finding Bomb Party in that community to help, but I'm still searching for that church home to help that way. But God doesn't only tell us to believe and to have community. He tells us what to do with our bodies in this community, to stand, to kneel, to bow, to clap, to dance, to lift our hands. It's a part of worship. And when you think of church, you think about worship. You're hoping that you're in a church environment that you do have freedom to worship, to lift your hands, to pray, to shout, to sing, to dance, to do all of those things. In a lot of my church searching, that was one of the biggest things, is the freedom of worship. It's so important. And those of you who haven't experienced the freedom of worship or even tried out worship, maybe you don't feel comfortable going to a church yet, but maybe you want to try it in your living room. Get some headphones on, turn on some music, wave your hands back and forth. God really designed our bodies to be a vessel for worship. What's really interesting is that the way we posture ourselves changes the chemical makeup and the movement and the health of our body. I don't know if you knew this, but when you lift your hands above your head, it puts you in a posture to open your lungs so you can breathe deeper. Your spine is more aligned. Your blood circulates better because the oxygen is better. Actually, if you're having like an asthma attack, lifting your hands above your head is supposed to help. I don't know if you'd be worshiping because you'll be gasping for breath, but that's neither here nor there. If you're worshiping, it sets you out of posture to breathe deeper. And a little side note, when you breathe in and out, your lungs kind of make a sound like Yahweh. God created our bodies to worship Him. God created us to be in community. When we isolate, when we lack worship, we're lacking the ability to live our best lives. And I myself suffer with loneliness, depression, anxiety, and a lot of times I feel like I could tie it right back to that very thing. When you're in a place where you don't have a home with that freedom, maybe that's not a thing that I'm doing enough of. I'm not connected. I'm not giving Yahweh breaths with my hands raised. I don't think God accidentally designed our bodies to benefit from the very posture He invites us to take during worship. Maybe worship was always meant to engage our heart, mind, body, and soul, not just our minds. If science tells us that belonging helps people to live longer, what is the responsibility of the church? If someone carrying invisible grief walked into your church, would they feel understood and safe? Do you create belonging and encouragement in those four walls? What kind of church am I helping to build? I still don't really know where home is, to be honest with you. I know that's supposed to be my cliffhanger. I've spent a year dedicated to Evangel. I do go there. I do support them. I do love that church so much. But it's not home. I still believe it exists. And maybe church becomes more like home when we choose to love people openly. But I will say, in the journey of church, it's really hard to find a place that you feel accepted. You can find a place that has freedom of worship, but feels very much like a bunch of cliques when you're in the audience. A place that has no freedom to worship, but feels like they want to love you no matter who you are. A place that has really bomb music, but the message just doesn't hit. A place that has the best pastor in the planet, but the musicians were not called by the heavens. I know there's no place that's perfect, but there's got to be a place for people who have felt like they were never good enough to land. They can sit back and say, this is home. The biggest issue I have found when talking to people who are unchurched and do not desire to take their children there, do not desire to expose their family to it, is that their church hurt was rooted in the business, the institution, and the plethora of rules that remind you that because you're human, you're not good enough. I myself have faced all of those same things, those same feelings. And it's such a hard place to say, ugh, I understand exactly how you feel, but I know there's got to be a place out there that's home, that connects us to the Heavenly Father, that connects us to community, that is not about lining pockets or beating you over the head or telling you you're not good enough. And that can be in any way. I don't want anyone to think that I'm nitpicking any type of belief system at all. You could be the tightest knit individual doing everything on a checklist, but there will still be the same people who look like you, talk like you, walk like you, will still make you feel like you are not good enough to be a part of them. And that has been part of the grief and the journey of hunting for my next home. But I don't want anyone hearing this to think it's best to just avoid those institutions or those places, because God designed us to be a part of it. And although I can honestly say at the end of this episode, I haven't found my home yet, and it grieves my spirit that I haven't. I don't give up the faith that it's out there. And I don't want any of you listening to this to give up. If you've walked away from church that you were raised under, if you've been church hurt, if you've been talked about, if you felt like you didn't belong, maybe you haven't even given it a chance because of all that you've heard, there is a place. We can find it. God designed us to be together, to not be isolated, to know about Him, to know that He loves you. And before the woman made the statement, she's never seen an authentic Christian, we got on that very topic because she made the statement that I've said about myself many times: I'll just never be good enough. And that's when I told her, I said, listen to me. It is about a relationship with Christ. If you have a tattoo, you have a tattoo. That's not what it's about. If you told a lie in your past, you're human. We all make mistakes. We all have hiccups. We all have past stories. But at the end of the day, it's not about a checklist of meeting a set of rules that someone has set. It's about a relationship with Christ. And in that relationship, He will align you with your purpose. I know deep down, without a shadow of a doubt, that that is the God that we serve, that He will align you with your purpose if you allow Him to do so. But I can sit here and tell you I've been church hurt. I've been shunned. I've been felt like I wasn't good enough. And I've visited church after church seeking that home. It's real. It's out there somewhere. I know that it's possible. I came from it. A place where no matter who you were, whether you were a street person living on the street, struggling with addiction, you could walk into Calvary Temple and get a kit to carry you through, a hug, a conversation, a prayer. We had a recurring lady who came all the time, and we got her goodie bags and all those things because we wanted to love people. And that's really what it's about. The hands and feet of Jesus are those who reach out to those who are broken and love on them. While I thought I was searching for a church, God was quietly trying to rebuild and heal something inside of me. And next week, we will talk about healing the places that I can't see and the places you can't see. We were designed for something more. Every single person, as a pastor might say, under the sound of my voice, is designed for something more. Maybe you're living in your purpose now. But is there some part of you that feels like something's missing? Maybe you have a husband, a family that you dreamed of, a job that you dreamed of, a career that you dreamed of. Maybe you've transitioned in life and it feels like that's the right place. All of those things could be very true, but is everything fulfilled? Will it ever be? I just want to close this episode out by saying, if you've ever found yourself in a place where you thought, church is not for me because you've experienced church hurt, I want you to take a step back and think about how we are all human and people make mistakes for a variety of reasons. Sometimes out of jealousy, sometimes out of hatred, sometimes because the enemy is inside of them. Sometimes because they just don't know anything better. They've never did a church tour to experience anything beyond what they know. A lot of people stay in their box and they don't explore what other people or lives are like, and they say things that come across wrong or misplaced because they don't have your experience. I've been there. I'm a pastor's kid. I was the black sheep. I was the no filter. I was the girl that my dad named Punk and only called me Punk majority of the time. I've been in those shoes and I can understand how you feel. Don't let those experiences that you may have faced in the past project your future. Because yes, those scars hurt. Yes, those moments that made you feel less than or broken or rejected, they're all real and they're valid. But it's not what God really intended. He loves you. He wants you to be a part of a community. He wants you to worship. He wants you to feel accepted and not isolated, connected and not alone, worshiping freely with a heart that is fulfilled and living in a purpose that you were designed for. If you're listening, there's purpose. If you're listening, there's breath still in your lungs. And every time you breathe, whether you like it or not, you're saying Yahweh, thanks to the way we're designed. I would encourage you to get out and explore. If you have a friend who goes to church somewhere, a child who's interested in Sunday school, give it a chance again. Because there's somebody sitting in a service somewhere who feels like you felt then, and maybe you're the person who's going to scoop them up and say, I'm sorry you were hurt by a damaged person, but that wasn't God. And let me show you, by loving you, what he really intended for all of us.